I'm ready.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and welcome everyone to the chat about the congestion on Highway 305 and through Agate Pass Bridge. I'm Rachel Seymour with the Kitsap Sun, and I'm here at Bainbridge Island City Hall with Mayor Blair. And we're also talking with the Kitsap Sun reporter, transportation reporter, Ed Friedrich, and he's back at the Kitsap Sun office. Go ahead and say hi, Ed.
Hey, thanks for joining us.
Yeah. And so our discussion is going to center around the future of Agate Pass Bridge and whether it needs to be widened or what can be done to help with congestion through the island and connecting the island and Seattle to the Olympic Peninsula. And so Ed's going to kind of talk about his story that he's done recently on that issue. And you can also click on the link within the discussion that one of our editors has posted. So Ed, if you'd like to take a moment to kind of recap that story for people.
Where the story came from was in November. There's this organization, I guess you could call it, that came together from North Mason, West Pierce, and all of Kitsap County that they decided they'd have more power in getting projects pushed through the legislature if they all agreed on what they wanted. And that was called the West Sound Alliance. I did a little story on them back in the fall, and they already had a list out, a preliminary list, and I happened to see Bainbridge had some things on there, and I'm not used to seeing Bainbridge having projects, so I did mention that in the story, and I had planned to follow up a lot sooner, and if I finally got around to writing the story just about 305 and Agate Pass that ran on Sunday. But that story talked about the primarily just all of the projects that they're proposing for the entire corridor. It's not just Bainbridge. There are a lot of them from Paul's Boat to the bridge also. But the fixes to the bridge, in fact, there's $164 million proposal, not proposal, but a project on a list for a new bridge and several smaller improvements on Bainbridge.
And so during this discussion, we definitely want a lot of input from people, and you can go ahead and type your questions into the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them as we can. But before we kind of get started, we also want to get an idea of who all is joining. And so we're going to go ahead and take a poll, and you can choose which one applies to, so we can get an idea of how many residents or commuters are with us today. So you can, let's go ahead and put that. All right. And so while we're having people do that, Ed, if you want to talk kind of with the mayor a little bit about what the island's currently dealing with, and it just so happens that we're also having this discussion while there's work going on to the bridge. And so that's kind of slowed things down, and currently the bridge is being cleaned and having any kind of repairs that are needed done to it. And so during this 3-week period, they've been alternating lane closures. And how has that affected the island? And where are the choke points during normal times?
You know, I think what has happened, and the experience that we're having, is that people are learning or experiencing what happens when there is a slowdown or a blockage on the bridge, which happens on a regular basis during the commuter hours. And with this one-lane closure during the midday, people are experiencing that choke point and living through it in real time all day long. And I think what that's doing is underscoring for people who don't necessarily think they're traveling, and they aren't, during the commute hours, but they're having that commute kind of slowdown experience. And I think it is helping, from my perspective, really highlight how much we need to be having a serious conversation about what the future could look like, and probably will, as traffic increases. And we need to be thinking about all sorts of options to an automobile-based transportation system. So that's a part of what's happening, and this is proving to us and making it more imperative sooner than we might have expected it to.
What about other choke points along there? Are the other intersections that are proposed for some improvements slowing traffic down? Does it get to the first one, say the ferry unloads, and they all get to that first one, and so there's a backup there, and then they all get to the second one, and then they still haven't even gotten through the first one?
Well,
Yeah, so now you have backups. How does that, or Suquamish?
well, I think that there are a couple of things that happen. You've identified what happens in the normal course of traffic. If in fact there is the line getting from one point to another doesn't fill in that gap between the stoplights, for example, at High School Road and then again at Day Road, or the next stop sign to the north, or which is basically ends up being the bridge. What does happen, and the reason that the lights, although they feel like a choke point to 305, what it does do is provide a way for people to cross the island from east to west. And one of the things that is just a fact of the island living, and with 305 as the main highway running north and south, the island has business and people who live on the east side and the west side and need to get across that main highway, which when it's full, you need to be able to get across, just for the residents who live here and the businesses on each side. So I think that is why we need those choke points, or at least the traffic slowing. We don't need the choke points, but we need the traffic control points at the intersections.
Now, I've heard that Bainbridge people plan their trips around the ferry schedule. Is that true?
Well, as a person who lives at the north end of Bainbridge Island, I can assure you that if at all possible, I certainly do pay attention to what I can imagine is the length of time it either takes the ferry traffic to reach the intersection that my home has with the highway, or I absolutely pay attention to it because if it's crowded, somebody stops and lets us onto the highway. So what many of us have realized is the easiest time to enter the traffic at 305 is during that heavy commute time, because of very courteous drivers who take sympathy on us and say, come on in, so that we don't have to just wait for the whole line. So yes, we do pay attention to the ferry traffic, absolutely.
Bill in Kingston says it's not as simple as a bomb at the bridge.
We kind of discussed some of the issues with doing repairs to either side of the bridge, because the bridge itself is a choking spot.
It is.
So what have you kind of heard from people, and as someone who lives on the island yourself, what's the best solution to dealing with the bridge? Is it widening it, or some people don't want to see that happen, or having an alternating lane? What are some of the ideas you've
I think that what we've learned, and certainly this recent cleaning up has also prompted the ability to ask the questions and to talk to WashDOT about it, because it's a state highway. So we really do have to look to the state agency to be thinking about it. The bridge itself really doesn't lend itself to widening. So it's not as though we get to just think about, well, if we could just cantilever an extra lane, or I mean, I've looked at it and thought, we really need those concrete buffers on each side. You know, maybe if it doesn't have the sidewalk and we figure out what to do about that. But structurally, it's an old bridge. It was built in 1952. As your story, I loved those stories. The history was great. I mean, it really was fun to read that. But it also underscores how old the bridge is and why it's functionally obsolete. And that just is a reality. And with that functional obsolescence, we can't modify the existing structure. So that's an issue. And I think some of the changes that are forecast for next summer to help make it safer for bicyclists. There will be a light that will go on that bicyclists can signal that they're riding across the bridge. Things like that will make it safer, but it doesn't reduce the traffic, and it doesn't address a change in accommodating more traffic. So we may be back to really thinking about how not to have so many cars, and whether that's a realistic issue. Go
We
ahead.
should probably remind people about what's happening at Suquamish. I did write a story a couple of weeks ago, and it was nice that the casino will provide Kitsap Transit with the same number of spots that park and ride spots as it has along the highway right there at Suquamish.
Right.
And get them out of there, and that will give them a space where they can do a right turn lane, separated right turn lane, and get some people off the road. I don't know how many people. Somebody asked me this today. Well, how many people even turn there?
Oh.
But it would get the it would help out some, and they would put some improvements into the entry to the casino, and they put a special entrance just for buses and the trucks, the delivery trucks. And they plan to do that. I know the bid goes out in summer, but I don't know when to work with. That's going to happen this summer too?
That, my understanding is the design work on that intersection, and with the improvements that you've just described, that is work that is scheduled to happen, as I understand it, this coming summer. But beyond the fact that that's what I've heard, I don't know the when of it. I think that I was surprised, and am pretty often surprised, by the volume of traffic going through that Kitsap, or through that Suquamish intersection, and I think that's why the decision was made that that really was such a significant place where the choke point, because you begin, if you can't turn right, if a driver is unable to turn right, heading north, unable to turn right and go down towards Suquamish and Kingston, and that portion, that northern part, even up into Hansville, then you begin to back it up again onto the bridge, which backs it up onto Bainbridge Island, and you know that whole domino, or it's not a domino because it's not falling. Nobody's moving. So that is a real choke point, and I think that this will make it safer, which is absolutely critical. And I think that there will be the park and ride space, making it easier for people to get on and off a bus and to see the visibility of our transits. I suspect the ridership will go up, although it's very high for those commuter runs. I think this will make it easier for people to take the bus. I'm hoping that. I mean, that's an absolute congestion reliever.
The part of that I didn't mention was they are planning to have a little heading toward the Paulsbo direction anyway. That little separated turn lane, there'll be a special lane just for the bus, and a bus stop there. They let people off, and then they, at the light, they would have a couple seconds to give the bus a head start to get out ahead of all the cars. And,
right.
And if we did those incentives, they believe, and even a big incentive, which I don't know if they could pull off, is allowing the buses to leave the ferry terminal before the cars.
Oh.
That way, if you put people in the buses and you'd have fewer in the cars, that's a thinking. I don't know if that would be allowed. I have heard that.
Yeah, well, and those, I mean, that kind of thing, I don't know the specifics of that. I'm sorry, I can't. I mean, it sounds like that would be a good idea, and any incentive we can provide and ease of doing that would be wonderful. I don't know the reality of it. We've laughed, and we do tease ourselves about the desire to be traffic engineers, and we keep being reminded we just aren't, despite our good ideas.
Well, it might be a good time to take a poll and see what some of the readers here and viewers think
So how's this
about the bridge.
Yeah, let's do a poll.
All right. So we're going to put up a poll, and you can choose what you think the best. Oh, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead of myself. we're going to check on your primary use of the pole. I mean, primary use of the bridge in this poll first. So we get an idea of who's using the bridge and why, and then we can go from there.
I lost their audio. Oh.
We may be being silent.
Okay.
And letting this poll take its way. So we'll see what we learn.
And there's no way to specifically know, but I know that lots of people have speculated that a majority of the people that use the bridge are not island residents, commuters. And Ed has stated that there's no way of specifically knowing that, but is that something that you kind of get a consensus for as well, or are you not?
I guess I would suspect, and again, it's me playing traffic engineer, I do not know, and Ed's point's well taken. I would speculate that the traffic, I think what we do know is that a lot of traffic coming across the bridge heading south, we've thought that a lot of it was going onto the ferries, but I think they now have done traffic counts by about the number of people crossing the bridge onto Bainbridge, because this is where they're working. You know, and so that sort of thing is going on, as well as heading directly to the ferry. They may also be coming to shop and have lunch, have dinner. We have grand restaurants and good shopping. We welcome the visitors. So, but I think there's also the business traffic. So your point's well made. I don't know how we're going to figure out, other than to count how many people come across the bridge and then don't continue on all the way down to the ferry. So you can do the arithmetic. But what's happening in between, I don't know.
And you mentioned all of the businesses and shops here. So obviously you all want visitors to come and to enjoy Bainbridge. So relieving that congestion is not only for the residents, but for making that easier.
Well, I think that's true. I think the other part, in addition to the Bainbridge businesses, I think the reality is that the State Highway 305 is the corridor to the the Kitsap and then the Olympic Peninsula. So we have to recognize that that is part of what's happening with this system. And with the ferries being the marine highway, this is a continuation of that. And we need to recognize that it is. And it's wonderful to have visitors come and stay and shop and enjoy Bainbridge Island. But some really just need to get off of Bainbridge Island, and it becomes a literal bridge to the peninsula and their destinations. So that's something that I think the island, all of us who are here, need to acknowledge, and will be part of how we have the conversation about how do we deal with that. It's back to the balancing. What, do we have some questions or some poll? What can you tell us? It would be interesting to know, and I bet people would like to know who's here and what you're learning from the poll. I'm curious.
Well, it seems like, let's see here, that most people who are taking the poll occasionally travel to the island, and then some use it to access the Kitsap Peninsula at various times throughout the week, and then even fewer people use it for commuting hours. But that's just what we're seeing here. And some people have mentioned, as far as other options, looking at other bridges around the island. And I don't know if either one of you have more information on that, or if Ed, if you've heard some information or have some thoughts on discussions about other locations for bridges on the island.
I heard from a lot of people who got on me for not mentioning that in the story, actually. I wrote about it a long time ago, when it didn't go over very well back then. But
where did it not go over well?
Pardon me?
I'm just curious about, you said it did not go over well. If people are curious about it, what are they thinking of? Tell me about the ideas you hear.
The idea is that the old one about taking a bridge, hopping from Illahee or Brownsville over to South Island, having a limited access freeway because Bainbridge didn't want people getting off too much into the island. They wanted them to get across that bridge, go right to this new super ferry terminal at Blakely Harbor.
Oh, I see.
And not do a whole bunch of exiting and wandering around the island, and they thought maybe that would be okay with Bainbridge if that were the case. And the same thing happened in at Vashon, where Vashon you wouldn't be able to get off at all on the proposal there. I don't think they wouldn't even let you get off the island. It was going to jump across, and sorry to get sidetracked, but it was a similar thing. And they jump across from South Kitsap to the northern tip of Vashon. Then it'd be a much bigger bridge that I don't even know if they could build. It was kind of a semi-floating bridge all the way over to like Burien area.
Well, okay, but I guess the question I have when I hear the ideas of alternate routes and so forth, which I think those all have to be explored, and I don't have any sense of it. Our community's not had a focused conversation yet about this. That's in the course of what we're going to be doing, and I'll certainly address that. But I think if everybody is trying to figure out how to get to Seattle, if that's the destination, then I've wondered, as you mentioned, something about a super terminal in the middle of Blakely Harbor. Why not a super terminal where people are headed and different ways of getting there, which brings me back to a passenger-only ferry approach, or that kind of thing. I mean, people coming from Kingston, coming perhaps from the Silverdale. I'm not opposed to even the concept, but it doesn't make much sense to pull into Blakely Harbor when, in fact, everybody's then going to just go on to Seattle. If that's really the destination, shouldn't we kind of think of how to get people to where they want to go?
Those are all options, and that's when the original list came out on the West Sound Alliance, it went straight to projects. But as you know, Senator Rolfes said, "Well, don't jump the gun. We need to study this," and so it's estimated to cost in that list $2 million, and that's something that can be done maybe even this session. I'm not sure, and get it all studied, and then we can look at those issues that you're talking about with a bridge coming from Illahee or who's actually using the highway and all of those things, so we don't waste money where we don't need to, and just.
Well, I think that makes a great deal of sense, and I hope you're hearing that I don't see how we could do anything except that. And we want to have and we need to have the studies done. I think we also know that we want to have the conversations within each of the communities that will be most directly affected by that. Certainly Bainbridge Island, but the Suquamish tribe, the city of, Paulsbo. I mean, there are so many, and then you're looking at the whole county. So it is a conversation that needs to happen in various places, in addition to the very careful count and looking at it with the engineering studies.
Well, if we want, we can go ahead and take a poll and see what people think about the different options.
I think that's
for the
great.
bridge.
Yeah.
And then we can kind of go through, it looks like we're getting some, not necessarily questions, but comments from people about, their thoughts and ideas. And I don't know if either one of you want to address some of them, but several people have mentioned the issue not being the bridge, but the signal at Suquamish Way.
Yeah.
And I know, Ed, you've previously written about it, and the roundabout idea, which would help move traffic, was found to be too expensive, correct?
Yes, that's how I was looking at the comments myself. That's what we were saying earlier, is when the state studied that, I don't think they had any idea of spending that much money on a fix right there, and so in fact, I don't think they know where they can get the money to build a roundabout, which is what I believe they settled on. So we have these intermediate fixes. I think their solution as the best in terms of both effectiveness and cost was that roundabout. A lot of people don't like roundabouts, so I'm not too sure that's what will be the final result there, but that's where we're headed right now.
And I think that some of the comments that I can see quickly mentioning that perhaps it's not the bridge, but in fact it is that Suquamish intersection, and these I am guessing are from people who face that on a regular basis, and the suggestion that adjusting the signals and coordinating the timing on the signals all the way along 305, thinking particularly of that Suquamish intersection. That was done, and I mean, that, you know, something happens, the power goes out, and then we have to readjust them one more time around. But it was done, and as one of the people, this is purely anecdotal, it definitely made a difference. I mean, it meant a great deal to people on the island being able to get on and off of 305. I don't know whether it managed the congestion overall. I just don't know. But that's the kind of thing that needs to be looked at, and it certainly is part of the plan to be implemented when we're widening and dealing with that Suquamish intersection, which is seen as a way of relieving some of the choke.
And the bridge and the intersection are so close together that it's difficult. They almost act as one big mess there.
You're right. It is a mess right now.
And it looks like we kind of have a variety of
good.
input from the poll, kind of all split. But the most people, I mean, we're not getting a huge amount of people on the polls, but it looks like a majority of the people are in favor of building a new bridge, new bridge with the existing Agate Pass Bridge. And
so that there would be there'd be
bridges.
two bridges. Okay. Is there any indication of where that bridge would be, and would it bypass Bainbridge?
Well, I don't think our poll's that advanced.
Oh, come on. I want the answers.
Yeah.
We need everybody to be a traffic engineer.
Yeah, well, someone had also mentioned that, you know, as we've discussed, there are businesses on the island, and a second bridge would help facilitate more use of that. But as we've also discussed, there needs to be a balance of seeing where people are going and providing them that access to Seattle if they want, while giving people who want to come and enjoy Bainbridge or come and go from Bainbridge the access they need.
Right, yeah.
Well, Ed, do you have any other questions for the mayor or ideas you want to discuss with her that you've heard about?
Well, Doug mentioned real-time sensors at all of the signalized intersections. That would probably have to be part of the study, so we know exactly what's happening at those intersections and how to adjust the lights. And I would have thought that they are already synchronized, but maybe not.
They certainly, that was done, and it is, I think, intermittently, but what happens is just that something interrupts it, and then they get out of sync, and it may not be, I mean, I think that is definitely an approach, and it certainly is one that WashDOT has been aware of and has accommodated and made the adjustments, and then it is that something happens and they're out of sync again. But it's a good approach, and it's an inexpensive one that can be done and does prove to work.
Here's a comment, and the one thing I was just going to say that somebody brought up, and I didn't realize what was going on earlier in the week when they mentioned two bridges, keeping the one bridge.
Mm-hmm.
That you could just have that bridge be one direction, and the new bridge would only have to be 2 lanes. It wouldn't be as expensive. Just make sure the existing bridge is seismically safe, and it seems like you can do that.
Well, and again, I mean, I think those are that kind of thinking will have to be a part of a solution. And I mean, I wouldn't even presume to do anything other than say, that's an idea, it needs to be in the hopper. I don't know the answer to it. It's easy to begin thinking, well, that wouldn't work, because just as easily as it would it is to say, what a great idea, let's do that. I mean, I just don't know, but I think those are the kinds of ideas that come from a community conversation.
Right. We're jumping the gun a little bit, but it's good to get some ideas out there, and if we have that study, all of them will hopefully be addressed, and we'll look at all of the options and actually have data to go with that and make the right choice.
Can I think it sounds, one of the things that I would really hope for people who are Bainbridge residents that are watching this conversation or have questions about it, we're working on, as are all the jurisdictions, the update to our comprehensive plan so that we are, in fact, managing the change that's coming and that we're living in now and will in the future. But next week, we're having 2 listening sessions in the community to talk about infrastructure. And I would really encourage people to come, because that's the beginning of this collective imagining and looking at these issues. So
what day?
All right, I was just going to say, I'm happy to tell you. All right, so Monday, it's from 10 o'clock in the morning until 12:30, so it's a 2.5-hour conversation at City Hall, and then it's Wednesday evening from 6 until 9, or 6:30, excuse me, from 6:30 to 9. And again, that's one of we have 2 questions that will be asked, and one of them is about the infrastructure.
And are non-residents, are they welcome to come, like commuters and people who use the highway and bridge?
I mean, it's fine. I mean, we're certainly not, I mean, no one is excluded and that sort of thing. So people are absolutely welcome. I think they need to understand that this is a time when this particular city is looking at how do we handle it. But, as your point is making, everybody that travels 305 is a part of our city at some point every day.
And it looks like we had a very interesting question come in, and
Okay.
I don't know if we've addressed it. Ed, you might know a little bit more about it, but it's asking about the prognosis and lifespan of the current bridge. So what do you know about that?
I was just going to ask you that question. I don't know. I've seen where people are saying that there's it's seismically unsound. I've never seen that. I have the last inspection on my desk, and I don't think I saw that in there. And answering the question of how much longer, I can't do. But right now, they say it's fine. It's functionally obsolete because it doesn't have big enough sidewalks, and it's hard for bicyclists, and primarily because bicyclists have trouble and pedestrians. But the bridge isn't going to fall down, and I don't know what type of lifespan it would have beyond. If they can always strengthen them.
And I think that, I think that the functional obsolescence has a lot to do with the fact that at this point we also have larger, the trucks are bigger, and the traffic that it's being asked to carry it's a different load than it was initially built for, to say nothing of how it works for pedestrians and the bicyclists. And when 2 of the large trucks are going by one another, those kinds of things fit into that conversation. I think for the person asking about the safety and so forth, that's a part of what's going on and will be an outcome from this 3 weeks of work. Because that is about the inspection and the correction of easily mended if there are problems, that kind of thing. And I don't know, nothing indicates that those have been discovered, and in fact, I think there's been recently, as of today, a very reassuring message from WashDOT about the condition overall of the bridge. But they have not done anything, I mean, we yet have to see a report.
Yeah, when you're discussing lifespan, it also determines, are you talking about safety lifespan, or whether or not it's allowing traffic to flow in a functional manner lifespan, so that those kind of factors as well.
And I think that's the conversation, hopefully, that we'll have at least some of the answers coming out of this recent 3-week study of the bridge and looking at it, as it stands as a physical structure.
Several people have mentioned that you can't just put 4-lane the bridge. You would have to 4-lane the highway on each side, which kind of goes without saying to me. But they wanted, several people have brought that up. I don't see any other way you would do it.
Well, I mean, you just change if we didn't do something that made it possible, you know, to go as a through pathway from either side of the bridge. You just change the choke point. I mean, now the possibility. I mean, that I agree with you, and I don't know what that means or how it's accommodated, but I would agree that something has to happen all the way across. We need to see it as a continuation and a part of the highway, not a separate structure.
And I really talked about non-expansion options.
Could it be done? Do you think there's any chance put all of these other alternatives together? We wouldn't need 4-lane. The bus get shuttles and buses and jump lanes, some kind of transit-oriented bus rapid transit. All do everything you can do. Is there any way to avoid, or the traffic just going to overwhelm it someday?
I don't know the answer to that, Ed, and I think that's part of why the study needs to be done, you know, in a thoughtful way, looking at it by traffic engineers and so forth. I don't have any idea. I mean, that what we can do and do know is that having jump lanes and more people riding mass transit absolutely reduces the number of vehicles, single automobiles on the road, and that will change the congestion. Whether that's the final, I mean, how long a fix that is, I just don't have any idea.
I think that corridor also is pretty strong in that regard, because about twice as many people walk onto the ferry as drive on, and so that gives an indication that you're having some pretty good. They have to get there somehow. They might drive and park, but we know that that's no fun. So I think a lot of people are taking the buses already, and or some other means to get there. That's just, ferry people have told me over 15, 20 years that those are like huge buses that carry cars, those ferries.
Well, it's certainly mass transit.
And I think that...
Well, I agree, and I think that it does show that, and I think the fact that we have the park and rides that are more numerous and they're full, and that's, again, one of the things that I think dealing with, and the cooperation that's going on with Kitsap Transit, the Suquamish Tribe, and WashDOT is really a very positive collaborative effort to help increase the mass transit use and lighten the load of individual cars heading back and forth from the ferry.
Somebody is saying that a roundabout isn't too expensive. I don't think we said that, although that I think that is the plan. But before we get to that, and there isn't any money for it, I don't believe. Before we get to that, we're going to put these little fixes in first at Suquamish.
Well, I think that at this point, that because of the fact that the state financial picture has some very different priorities right now, and that's what the legislature is working on. So I think rather than my speculating about it, I think that's a conversation, and appropriately with WashDOT, who can best explain the issues, because I don't know them. I mean, I can speculate with everybody else.
One person did ask about the reality of this like the time span of maybe a new bridge, or he wasn't specific, but the time span of this happening during a lifetime. I'm going to go ahead and put another bridge out there as an option. And you've been covering transportation for a while, and have been with the Kitsap Sun for a long time. And I guess the best way to maybe get an understanding, because we don't have an idea of how long maybe a new bridge could take, what was the time span like with the Tacoma Narrows Bridge and that expansion.
That's an interesting point.
And just to give people an idea of the obstacles and how long an additional bridge can take.
Well, it all has happened while I've been covering this, so it hasn't been that long. That the obstacles, it was a huge fight to get the bridge through there. The Gig Harbor and South Kitsap people didn't want tolls; they wanted the bridge, and they people made them look like they didn't want the bridge, but they were the ones to benefit the most. They just didn't want to pay for the whole thing by themselves, which is what they're doing now for the most part. That would probably be the same thing that you would face trying to put a new bridge into Bainbridge. So it'd be you'd have that political obstacle. You'd have to try to get it. The majority of people, you wouldn't do it probably if the majority of people weren't for it, but you still have the vocal minority to deal with. I don't think it would take that long to build it. Of course, all the permitting, that can go on for years.
How long?
Anytime there's water. And
do you know how long it took to get the Tacoma Narrows, the new Tacoma Narrows? I just can't. I don't know well enough the situation. How long that took from the decision and the funding to actually having it something we could travel on. Do you remember how long it took?
I think they started in 2002, but somebody here says 7 years.
Oh,
somebody, that's one of the commenters. I thought the first financial plan was 2002, but it went way back before then. All the planning and things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
Once they started, it was. I lived down there. It was really cool to watch. It went fairly quickly for a huge bridge like that, and you'd think that a bridge across Agate Pass would not be nearly the human, the human building the difficulty. I'm trying to spit out some words here.
And it's an interesting question that certainly, and actually, I think we can look to the reporter on this side who took the time and was able to look up and answer. So give us what you know.
It is from Wikipedia, so I'm gonna put that out there.
Mm-hmm.
But it's according to Wikipedia, the construction began in 2002, and the new bridge started carrying eastbound traffic in July of 2007. So
5 year.
And it looks like, correct me if I'm wrong here, but according to Wikipedia, Ed, it's saying that the original bridge was built in 1950 as well. So it's the same age as the Agate Pass Bridge.
Right. Yes, that's true. Fine. You have to just maintain them so much, to constantly paint them like a Navy ship, keep them from rusting. Now you can look at the old Manette Bridge. Mm-hmm. We had to get rid of that one. It was having, by that time, I don't remember how old that is. It's 1930s, I believe, and it was really having rust problems, and the structure under the water that it stood on was falling apart. So whether the Agate Pass Bridge would eventually have those problems, I suppose it's possible.
Well, I think that at this point that was part of it, certainly in listening and understanding why WashDOT went, and they now have the bridge maintenance program in an organized way and have begun catching up with some of their backlog. I think that kind of thing is part of why they did this cleaning. It had been 20 years since this kind of work had been done on the Agate Pass Bridge, and the idea being take care of that and do this major work, and then each year after they can do a much lighter maintenance, cleaning, and checking.
I'm surprised they let it go that long, too. And they explained why, but I don't know if that's an excuse.
Well, it's an explanation we've got, and there you go for the moment.
Well, I guess I want to make sure that we we make sure that we've answered everyone's questions and they don't have any additional questions. And I wasn't able to find, I didn't look too deeply, but I wasn't able to find when the new Manette Bridge was constructed or how long that took.
You mean the new Manette Bridge isn't in Wikipedia?
I can see that it opened in 1930, so you are right about that, Ed.
Hit them all tonight.
Wait, hold on. I stand corrected. In the spring of 2010, construction began on replacement of the bridge, and the new Manette Bridge opened in November of 2011. So
it's pretty quick.
Yeah, it took about a year for construction, that is. So, and it was also listed as functionally obsolete as well, so it was redone. So I guess that answers that question.
Let's see what other kinds of questions or observations those who are paying attention. They're answering our questions, Ed. It's great. People who do know this.
They have all the answers.
Well, that's good. That's what we've been saying all along. We need to have this community conversation.
For what?
I guess there's also been a question of whether or not a toll could be put in place to help fund a new bridge. And I'm sure that's all dependent on the willingness of people to pay a toll, because they're not often popular. But I guess, would you be willing to pay a toll to help ease congestion?
It's an interesting and very personal question. I think that at this point, I think those are the realities of funding a project like this. And I think that that's a part of our responsibility as citizens to help. If that's the way it works, yes is the answer. I mean, I don't think I'm not turned off by that idea, because I think the reality of it is that may be the way we need to do it with our particular state financial, both situation and structure.
Yeah, and I know as someone who lives in Bremerton and visits Seattle, I can either take the ferry or I can drive through Tacoma. And not only is there a factor of how I best want to spend my time, but also a factor of the toll versus the ferry ride. And so that could maybe make people rethink how they travel as well to deal with congestion.
Well, I think that those are all the reasons that people and other places, and certainly places around Washington State, are using tolling as a way of funding that. And we look at, if you think of the ferries as part of the Marine Highway, and I do, we are paying a toll to go from Bainbridge to Seattle and back, or from Bremerton or from Kingston. So any of those could be considered a toll.
And we've also got some other questions that I know that we've discussed in the newsroom previously, and Ed, you might be a good one to answer this, about if there was a second bridge, how that would affect the Bremerton ferry, and whether the Bremerton ferry route would be needed. And also on that
second bridge, the bridge that they're talking about there is the one from Brownsville or Illahee. That was the theory that came out a few years ago, is that everybody that's riding the Bremerton ferry would take the short drive, cross that new bridge to the super ferry terminal at Blakely. Bremerton ferries, if needed, would be moved there, and the Bainbridge ferry would be there. And the Bremerton ferry route would be abandoned, which would save them provide some of the money, and that's an ongoing expense. Ferry operating money will never go away, whereas the bridge cost eventually will. And so that was part of the argument, is that do away with the Bremerton ferry. It's so long in the first place, it takes an hour to get there. Have Bremerton and Silverdale people drive across to the island and go to that super ferry terminal. And maybe if you still want some ferry service, that would be provided with passenger ferries from Bremerton. I believe that was the thinking.
Well, Well, I think that I guess I mean those are the ways. I mean, other ways of thinking about it and other options. I guess I'm concerned about facilitating more individual automobile traffic, and that's not written into what you're saying, but I think it needs to be looked at as multimodal for sure. We have to deal with also with transit and making that work and be dependable and available so that people are not having to drive and that we have park and rides within walking or biking distance of the residents so that we aren't always dependent on an automobile for very many reasons, not the least of which is the carbon footprint.
And I don't know if you've had discussions perhaps about this, but how does the Suquamish tribe play into dealing with the highway congestion and the bridge? And have you had any discussions with the tribe? Has the city talked with them about ways to improve the situation?
Actually, the tribe is very much a part of the conversations. I mean, it of course is a governmental entity, and this is the tribal lands as well as tribal members' ownership. So absolutely they're a part of it. And I think earlier I mentioned the collaborative effort that's going on right now with and among the Washington Department of Transportation, Kitsap Transit, and the Suquamish tribe in very much these improvements and trying to think about how to ease the congestion. So absolutely the tribal council are a part of, and their representatives are a part of any conversation like this. I mean, yes is the answer, straight across.
I know people get on the tribes a lot, but they were it was totally because of them that we were able to make these fixes this summer by them allowing the park and ride cars into that new
Absolutely.
park garage. And then, of course, the tribe is part of the West Sound Alliance at Bainbridge and all of the cities.
Well, and are an active part of the Regional Coordinating Council, which does the transportation. I mean, it's a place where all the jurisdictions can come together and work at and think about looking at the transportation planning. So, absolutely. I mean, it is a government entity and very much a partner in all of these conversations.
All right, we want to make sure we're answering everyone's questions. We're kind of closing in on an hour, so if you have any kind of thoughts or questions that you want to share with Ed or the mayor here, please send them in. I know one person had asked about raising the ferry rates on the island, and I'm curious. I'm sure that's been a concern for some of the residents here, perhaps. And so I don't know if you've heard anything about concerns about that raising or if that's...
It's always a problem, and I don't think I don't know that anybody is saying that we're being picked on unfairly or anything. I mean, I don't hear that aspect to it. The fact is that the rates do go up, and this particular run happens to be the one that works as definitely an income revenue generator for the whole system. So there's a lot of work going on looking at the Washington State Ferries long-range plan. And each of the ferry communities all around the Sound are a part of that conversation. And certainly rates as well as the routes come into it. So it's an ongoing one, and nobody has any fun going in and spending that much money on the ride, but at the same time there's a recognition, that, it's what it is, and we can lobby for it. We've got to come up with some other creative ways of funding these projects.
Were they talking about raising the ferry fare to be used for the bridge?
He didn't specify.
I think, I think it goes back into the ferries. I think there's...
right, the ferry fare increases, they've pretty much standardized those now after a disaster for 10 years after the MVET problem in 2000. Now they stabilize at about 2.5, kind of a cost of living raise every year, and so it's not so bad. People will yell at me for saying that, but relatively speaking, it's a cost of living thing, and if they can just keep it, of course, it'd be nicer if they lower them. But when does that ever happen?
Well, we have some questions coming
Right.
in, and one is
What questions?
for the mayor. Apparently, Adele Ferguson once said, this is of course coming from one of our readers, that the Agate Pass Bridge existed so that the islanders could go to Costco. Whether or not that's true, we don't know. But his question is that why would they ever want to expand the bridge? And we've kind of touched on some of that and the realities of the island being a corridor. I don't know if you want to.
Well, and we have to be realistic about, and remind ourselves that islanders are a part of this Kitsap region, and that's just a reality of the fact that it's a state highway that takes people and continues the marine highway. So islanders, and in fact, I just bet that there are islanders who do go to Costco and are very appreciative of having the bridge. So I'm not sure that's the only reason that the bridge exists, quip or not. It's an appreciated part of it, but there's a very real recognition. And if there isn't, we're going to have to work on helping islanders understand how very much we are a part of a region and that we benefit in all ways from being in this region with travelers going in each direction. The bridge has 2 lanes and it does run 2 ways.
And we've also got some questions about kind of the right-of-ways and the possibility of expanding Highway 305. And so I guess, is there room to expand 305? And you'll probably know a little bit more about this, but Mayor, you might also know a few things about what's there to expand, if possible.
Do you want to talk about the state highway right-of-ways?
No, not really.
Oh, yes.
I don't know. I don't know how wide it is, but doesn't it seem wide to you? Seems like there's plenty of room there.
And then we've talked about the restriping. And, honestly, among the conversations that have come up with WashDOT, as we've talked about things that we could do that might be easier, less expensive fixes and that sort of thing, not with the full community. So this is really about a group of people that are sitting and saying, we've got some problems. What are the options? Is this realistic kind of thing? And one of them might be the restriping with a reversible center lane or a bus lane. There are many problems that come up when you offer those kinds of ideas. I don't know factually. Again, it's that risky business of pretending you're a traffic engineer and can imagine an answer. I don't know how big the right-of-ways are. And just because I think it looks like it ought to work doesn't mean it would. And I think that's a fair question, but unfortunately I don't have the answer to it.
Right. Obviously, it would be less expensive to widen 305 than to build a brand new freeway from across the island somewhere to a different bridge.
Well, and that, I think that's the point. And when we talk about things like the right-of-ways and widening 305, you come back to where this conversation started an hour ago. We have a choke point. There are many choke points along 305 on that route from the ferry terminal in Winslow up even to Paulsbo. There are many choke points, but one of those that you can do all sorts of things on either side of it, but the bridge is there right now, and we don't have a plan for another one. We have a wish, and a wish is not a plan.
And
No.
I was going to say, when it comes to talking about the bridge being a choke point in the expansion of the highway, obviously I might be redundant here, but it doesn't seem like there's going to be enough money to do both at once. Like, it's something that would have to be phased in if we're going to expand the highway and add a second bridge. One has to come before the other. And I think that's part of this whole idea, and I think is one of the reasons that Senator Rolfes has been so supportive of getting a good, strong, and viable transportation study done with the idea of developing a plan so that we can figure out how that would fit together, because your perspective is exactly right. And it's an amazingly expensive proposition to put in a new bridge if it were doable in exactly the same location. Yeah, and someone actually has thrown out, we haven't discussed it here yet, we've done a lot of discussion of kind of the illegal bridge, but someone threw out the idea of a bridge from the south end as well, which I know that idea has floated out there before, but I don't know that we've discussed it here.
Oh, what?
Again, I think it comes back to the same idea. We're still coming onto the island, and at some point, it all funnels toward either this super, I don't know, ferry terminal that Ed has mentioned. I think, I mean, it's a reality. I don't know that that's a good one. I suspect that there would be a huge outcry across Bainbridge with the idea of taking private property and turning it into a highway. And in fact, you know, then we become the intersection. And I suspect that would hold very little water and would be a hard one for me. I'd have to understand it and hear a whole lot more support for something like that. And an absence of other creative ways of addressing an issue.
That's what happened the first time it was brought up.
They met somebody who said, aren't there some other options?
Well, no, they said, are you crazy? I almost slipped there. Are you crazy?
Well, and I'm trying to really I don't think it's crazy. I think it's one of those options that it's not fair to throw it out till it's been explored, but other options haven't really been brought up. I mean, we're all sitting around the equivalent of our kitchen table imagining an answer, and I think we need more factual information as well as a structured conversation in all the communities about this very topic.
And we have one commenter who is from the island. Kate had mentioned that a super ferry terminal would kind of ruin the peaceful aspect of the island. And I don't live on the island, but that's kind of when I think of a giant freeway over the island straight to a ferry terminal, it definitely gives Bainbridge a different feel.
And I think that's exactly the conversation that islanders, and that we are a city, and that's a conversation that they can have, and that's a decision that can be made. And my point to yours, Ed, that suggestion of the super terminal, is if we're all headed to Seattle, and that has a very robust and newly constructed terminal and a waterfront that is industrialized in a commercial area, that being the Seattle waterfront, I don't know why we wouldn't make that the super terminal and figure out how to get more boats in there.
I don't know why they came up with that other than experiments in the past with even 3 boats to Bainbridge. Do you remember, were you here then?
I was.
They tried running in the summer. They tried running 3 boats, which was kind of cool, except there just wasn't enough space for the 3 of them to operate together. And yeah. I believe that's where they came up with Blakely. But you have to build a whole new terminal there, a big terminal, like building a new Pullman dock that they're doing now, and build the freeway.
But you know, I have to kind of push back. I don't remember specifically, but again, if the need is for a 3rd ferry and that addresses something, I'm not sure there's a break in the logic about that, and I don't know that it was all about the fact that there wasn't room at the dock. I was thinking that there wasn't the money to make it work as a system, but again, unfortunately, I don't know.
All right, well, it is after 8 o'clock, so I don't know if we want to take a look at the comments.
We made it till 8 o'clock?
It is. So if we want to try and wrap it up and answer any of the last questions or address any comments people have. And also, even though we stopped talking on the video chat here, the chat that everyone is in is still going to operate. So you can talk amongst yourselves and continue the conversation without us.
Well, I have to say thank you to the Kitsap Sun for hosting this conversation, and to all the people who've tuned in and have become involved in the conversation. That really, what a heartening experience, and I thank you very much for including me in it.
And we have...
And Rachel,